I think it's really just not giving time or clicks or engagement, or I think, discernment and being able to tell, again, even though it's not straightforward and I've been duped too, like having a healthy kind of media diet and really thinking about what sources am I getting this information from.
Welcome to our podcast, To Free a Mockingbird, where we share your voices concerning the most crucial issues facing our world to show how civil discourse can occur. My name is Rishika, and I'm a high school junior who is passionate about politics and meaningful conversation. And I'm more than excited to be the co host for this podcast. This episode, we'll be discussing Palestine and the misinformation surrounding it, with help from our guest speaker, Pacinthe Mattar. Let's dive right into it. Disclaimer: we're not experts on this issue, we're just teenagers looking to make sense of the world through intentional and thoughtful discourse.
Our intention is to be unbiased and objective as possible. A feedback form will be released after the publication of this episode. Please give us your thoughts on how we handle this difficult topic.
Now, here's a quick look at the crucial background to our discussion.
So, Israel-Palestine conflict is a long-standing conflict. It is emotionally charged and it has caused geopolitical crisis.
Every time tensions rise, social media turns it into a battleground, not just for opinions, but for misinformation. Let's dive deeper into the conflict's history. Year is 1948. Israel was created and war breaks out within the Arab nations. The Nakba happens, where 700,000 Palestinians are displaced in what's known as the Nakba or catastrophe in Arabic.
In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel occupied the West Bank, the Gaza, and the East Jerusalem.
Ongoing Israeli influence in Palestinian areas include military settlements, military checkpoints, especially in the West Bank, that Palestinian civilians have to go through, and governmental control in Palestinian civilians' homes. There's a lot of Israeli influence in Palestinian areas, and I'm talking about the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And these include settlements, military checkpoints that Palestinian civilians have to go through every day.
Palestinian response included resistance from the citizens and internal division complicated the situation much more than expected. Now let's introduce our guest for this podcast, Pacinthe Mattar. She is a Toronto-based journalist known for tackling the Palestine Exception in the press, suppression of facts, coverage, recognition when it comes to discussing Palestine, including their ongoing conflict and human rights violation. Now, what unique insight can Pacinthe offer us in this episode?
Purpose of this episode is mainly to talk about the dangers of altering or withholding information, censorship, and how it goes hand in hand with spreading misinformation. And only through responsibly and intentionally sharing the truth can we expect public opinion to be grounded in fact. And that is the main purpose of this episode. So let's dive right in.
So, hi Pacinthe, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you so much.
It's so nice to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So, our first question to you, Percent, is regarding the Palestine exception in the media. How can you describe the effects it has had on public perceptions of Palestine and the conflict surrounding it?
Sure. First of all, thanks for inviting me on, and thanks for inviting me on to talk about this specific topic. I find that most news organizations and programs, they don't want to touch this. So I commend you for being brave and having the moral courage to realize that this is a very important, I see this as a press freedom issue. Let me start first by just, for anyone who maybe doesn't know what the Palestine exception is, just to kind of set that up in my own words. But basically, the Palestine exception, which is not a term that I've come up with, is basically the phenomenon of feeling like all these morals and goals and values that we have, whether it's press freedom, whether it's human rights, whether it's international law, are somehow they all fly out the window when it comes to Palestine. And in my case, I experienced the Palestine exception firsthand when I worked at the CBC. I was a producer there for 10 years, and I was working on a daily program, and I worked on daily programs for the entire 10 years. And so that means that every single day for 10 years, so think about that, that's thousands of interviews. I produced interviews every single day in the thousands. The one interview of mine that never went to air, and not only didn't go to air, it didn't go to air, we didn't talk about why it didn't go to air. I was told instead of explained or had a conversation about it. Basically, this interview with a Palestinian journalist reporting from Jerusalem was pulled from the air with no explanation. And furthermore, this interview really marked me and prevented my growth at the CBC. And that is essentially why I left. So the Palestine exception, how does it affect perception? Basically, it means that in the sense of, I'm just one example of what happens when you try to report on Palestine, but what that means on a grand scale, and what's happening to me, or what happened to me, is not unique. And I think the last 2 years have shown very, very clearly, whether it's academics losing their jobs, or journalists being fired, or journalists being killed in Gaza, I think is also part of the Palestine exception. It means that we are not even able to understand or get the truth of what's happening because we can't even touch it. How can we learn or understand an issue that we are not even able to talk about, or that when we do talk about it, there is so much fear, there's so much self-censorship. So basically, Palestine becomes a thing that we, A, never get to talk about, never get to hear about. We don't even get to ask questions. And I think the worst part of the Palestine exception to me, editors can pull your story, or, managers can make decisions, or people can be fired. But I think the most insidious part of the Palestine exception to me is it basically encourages a lot of us to self-censor so that you learn yourself, I'm not even going to touch this because I know it comes with so much trouble. And at the end of the day, all of this together means that stories about Palestine do not make it out, that Palestine becomes something that is to be feared. And if you fear something, you don't understand it, you can't ask questions, and therefore it just completely evaporates from the public discourse. But I think journalists on the ground in Gaza, powered by the power of social media that is not mediated by media bosses and directors, have kind of really punctured this silence and this abyss of a lack of information on Palestine. And it is delivered right to our phones, and it has been so powerful to see it being challenged in real time.
I completely agree with everything you said, especially because I've noticed, especially within my social circles, that the whole reason people hesitate to talk about this issue, about this conflict, is because they're so afraid that they will be attacked for their opinions or they will be silenced purely because it's supposed to be a so called controversial topic when millions of other controversial topics revolving around these issues are talked about every day, but it's specifically the Israel Palestine conflict that's not talked about enough.
Absolutely, and this is something that we all, I think, have felt. You're saying it, you're seeing it in your social circles, and I've been hearing, and I'm sure you've been hearing and seeing that this is a phenomenon that's very widespread.
You're so brave to even talk about this, and thank you so much for coming here. I love to see brave young women.
Thank you.
You have said that suppression happens partly because of who is considered authorized to narrate these stories. How does that intersect with the spread of misinformation online?
Well, I mean, if you're preventing the flow of real information from the ground and you're not reporting on it or amplifying it, it gives a lot of room for people who are not there, who don't have the expertise, to just basically take control of the narrative. So, I mean, it's a very simple equation. If you don't have the actual reality of what's happening reported, what ends up happening in that vacuum? And also, we know that the algorithms of social media platforms really prioritize stuff that's very divisive, stuff that gets a lot of clicks. Truth is not a measure of what is popular in online spaces, right? And in fact, I think we've seen a real uptake in not just misinformation, but outright disinformation. That is information that is designed to be deceptive and to throw people off. So if you don't have the real reported facts out there in the public discourse, what ends up taking off is the divisive, sometimes not factual, sometimes taken out of context, sometimes just anything that draws real emotion. And we've seen over the years, what is the stuff that travels very well? What is the stuff that gets engagement? I mean, happy stuff gets engagement, but what really gets engagement is stuff where people are very angry, where they are bringing out the worst emotions in people, and that's the stuff that really, really takes off. So these two patterns kind of go hand in hand.
Exactly. And when people have no verified news source to check their information from, where exactly would they be able to verify this misinformation or, as you said, disinformation that they receive on social media?
I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm in a lot of WhatsApp groups, some of them with my family and family friends who are Egyptian and who are either back home in Egypt or here. And WhatsApp has become such a source of it just proliferates so much so many, like my my WhatsApp group chats are full of so many links and articles and videos and reels. And to the average consumer, right, not a trained journalist who knows what's real and what's not, what's authentic and what's not, what's a verifiable, legitimate news source, no one is really verifying. What they're doing is they're looking at something, it hits them in a certain way, whether they love it or they hate it or they think it's abhorrent, and they just forward it on. So I do this with my own family. When they send me something on WhatsApp and I look at the link and I realize that it's either not a reputable news source or the information is wrong, I tell them, I said, I'm going to need you all to start to be your own fact checkers. Before you send me any information, as the family journalist, before you send me any information, I need you to go find 2 other sources from reputable news sources that say this information. If you can't find it, do not send me this link. So it's kind of my way of trying to get people to think about verifying the information that they're getting instead of being vehicles themselves of this misinformation that we are fighting.
There's this term in India called WhatsApp University. When somebody states something which is not reputable or untrue news or misinformation, they're called, "Are you from WhatsApp University?" Because that is where misinformation spreads a lot.
Exactly. WhatsApp University. I love that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the reason people don't end up fact checking the information is because there is just so much information going around, whether that is verified or misinformation or disinformation, especially as you said, because platforms like WhatsApp just help proliferate more and more of this. And when you get 50 messages on the same topic from 50 different sources, do you really have the time to verify it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Part of this is a volume problem. Like we're all kind of drinking from this water hose. I don't think we've ever had this much information at our fingertips and we are drowning in it. Even myself, I'm not immune to getting things wrong. I have definitely believed certain things to be true that I've seen online because the way they're packaged looks so legitimate. And it's just, again, we're drowning in it. So we don't have the same time or ability to discern what's real and what's not. So yeah, it is a real crisis. And especially if this is just kind of the norm and for people who, are coming up in a world, your generation and younger, where this has always been the case, I think it's going to become more and more important to be very, very disciplined about what you amplify, what you follow, what you engage with, what you share. So I think there is a measure of personal responsibility, but of course that is nothing compared to the responsibility of these billionaire CEOs and founders that thrive in this online chaos.
Exactly. I completely agree. Moving on to our next question. When mainstream outlets avoid Palestinian perspectives, how do social media posts or rumor based clips then rush in to fill the gap?
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, one somewhat positive takeaway, although in the context that it's in, it's still very upsetting. But I think we've never seen, in your generation especially, Gen Z has been very, very alert to the fact that what we are seeing on our newscasts, in our newspapers, is not matching up at all to the testimony and documentation of journalists in Gaza, in the West Bank, who can literally directly stream their realities to us every single day. What that means is that there's almost kind of like 2 worlds, and I would say in the Canadian media ecosystem, I think it's never been more apparent that what you're seeing on the news, sometimes Palestine doesn't even make the news, but on my news feed, it's literally almost the only story, and we're getting it from so many angles. And the way it's told through these social media accounts, it has emotion. It is like it's almost unbearable to watch because you can see real, raw, unfiltered tragedy unfolding. And that is by nature emotional. It is something that makes you react if you are a human being with feelings. And what happens is when you see this on the news, it's often packaged in such a way that is so clinical and so sterile. That's if it makes the news at all, right? So, of course, what you have now is real life testimony, eyewitness testimony from journalists and regular people who are documenting their lives, whether it's them trying to find food to eat or the joy that they try to create in the camps with songs and dances for kids kids. You have that competing with, again, these clips that are full of misinformation or clips that are designed to provoke a reaction. And so these two things are in competition. And overall, the average person, I think, is going to go towards the more extreme, the more shocking. So there's kind of like this competition between the real life eyewitness testimony of people there and then these kind of content accounts and bad faith actors that will take things and repackage them and send them out. Something's like over the top or trying to draw an experiment out. So yeah, that's the kind of the impact of the suppression of real Palestinian voices from the ground.
I completely agree. And as you mentioned, the Canadian news network and news channels. In India, Palestine barely ever makes the news. And when it does, no Palestinian representation is ever given. As you said, all the news that's being conferred to us from these news channels is said in this almost clinical way, right? That's because there's no real testimony from a person on ground in the Gaza Strip right now. And that gap is filled in by actual journalists on ground. Like one of the most popular ones, obviously, is Bisan. And I think she and a lot of other journalists in the Gaza Strip have done a great job of reporting on ground incidents. And that has created a lot of awareness, especially in my generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Bisen has been one of the most brave and courageous and consistent and professional, although I hate to use that word professional, it comes with all these connotations, but I'm always struck by how she is literally reporting on her own displacement, her own hunger, her own fear, her own heartbreak, along with her entire community. And she has been doing it with such clarity and such consistency. So it's been incredible to see this. I think, journalists like Bisen are putting media and journalists at large to shame because they are, I think, the true meaning of journalists. And it's been incredibly beautiful to see such a young woman become such a go-to voice to get the truth of what's happening in Gaza.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you're aware, there's also this like one little girl from the Gaza Strip called Renad. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's this little girl who posts these cooking videos, and I feel like that kind of content really moves people. People watching their families get bombed and dying, get massacred, and all they're trying to do is find a glimpse of joy in their lives to sort of get back this feeling of being human again and not having to worry about who's going to die next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's so much, as you point out, there's so much tragedy and heartbreak and outright, misery playing out. But I think accounts and stories that show joy, that show food, that show culture, that show love, that show laughter are incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I think one kind of danger of the narrative that's emerging is that this kind of skewing, for very good reason, towards like really sad and really kind of heartbreaking and really devastating stories from Gaza. But it's not just that. And Palestinians themselves will always tell you, we are a people who love to laugh, who love to live. There have been weddings in Gaza. There have been births, engagements. They love cooking. They love dancing and singing. And I try to, as much as possible, give the joy as much time and as much space and as much place in the story of Palestine as all the heartbreak that we're seeing as well.
And I think I also try to do that a lot, especially because the media has tried so much, mainstream media obviously has tried so much to dehumanize the Palestinian people. And I think this kind of content where they truly engage and in their joy and participate in their culture and share their culture with the world really humanizes them to people watching.
Absolutely.
I would like to add one thing that whenever we talk about conflict zones, there is this piece of us who imagines to always there be bombs and always there will be menace to be occurred. But when we talk about that, there are weddings happening, there are engagements, there's happiness, there's laughter. It again humanizes them in a way where we start relating to them and we understand their sorrow more. We understand them better and we start relating to them. They become relatable. Like conflict zone, whenever if you talk about, I'm currently in India, and here we have a lot of support for Balochistan. Balochistan is a conflict zone in Pakistan. It's in a neighboring country. And there, from Balochistan, there are usually these little videos coming up where even though so many brave mothers have lost their sons, there are still videos coming up of them dancing, them celebrating their culture. And I think culture is a way which empowers in the time of any conflict zone. It gives an identity and it humanizes these people.
Absolutely. And I love that you're drawing comparisons to Balakistan because sometimes I think we lose sight of the fact that we are so interconnected and struggle and oppression is so global. So the fact that you can make these ties, I think, is very, very powerful.
What advice would you give to students or you, especially those of us from marginalized backgrounds who want to report on or talk about Palestine fairly and responsibly?
I would say use your voice. Don't be intimidated. The world is changing in real time, and the truth will never be wrong. It may feel scary. You might be worried about your career, and I think it's also very important to be clear and be specific in what you're saying and come from a place of knowledge. But I would say use your voice. Your moral compass is a really, really good guide. And I think one of the best things you can do right now is to amplify the work, amplify the testimony, amplify the stories of people on the ground. Include Palestine in your conversations. It doesn't even have to be in a formal or official setting, but sometimes I'll just be walking in the street in Toronto and I see people wearing kufiyas and I see people wearing watermelon pins or Palestinian flags, or there's posters saying end the siege on Gaza or all eyes on Rafah. And it's kind of like forcing Palestine into our world. And I think it's like important for us to kind of follow that and draw courage from that and not feel isolated. And crucially, like find community. I would not be able to be doing the work that I'm doing and the writing that I'm doing if I wasn't very, very well supported by friends, by family, by fellow journalists who understand how challenging this is. So this is work that you don't do alone. You also don't have to take it all on yourself. I see this kind of work as what I call like a relay race. So I might write an article and it never feels like enough, right? You're like every day there's so many horrific things, but do what you can do it well, help others, amplify the truth. Be careful not to slip into things that may be used against you. There's a lot of things that are not helpful to amplifying what's happening in Palestine. So stick to the truth, stick to, the eyewitness testimony, and don't be afraid because one day, just to quote from an author and friend of mine, Omar Al-Ed, who wrote this book, one day everyone will have always been against this. So even though right now it feels scary, I think the fear is falling apart because it has become so abundantly clear that the story of Palestine has not been told well, has not been told at all. And we are seeing, I think part of what we're seeing is a result of that. We have not been able to fix or address what's happening in Palestine, which is a military occupation that has been going on for generations, because we can't name it. We can't even talk about it. We can't use those words. So words are an incredibly, incredibly powerful tool in this time.
I completely agree. And as you said, it's also in the small things, just small ways of representing that you support the people, you support humanity, whether that be buying from Palestinian businesses or just spreading the word online or even just talking about this issue within your social circles. I feel like is the voice we can give to the hundreds and thousands of Palestinians that need it right now the most.
Absolutely.
My mom is a social worker and she always says this one thing that right things always feel tough because doing the right things are tough. They are so, so tough that sometimes you fear it, sometimes you lose yourself in the process. But when you have that feeling that, hey, this was tough, but I did the right thing, there is no one happier than you, there is no one more joyful than you.
Absolutely. It's very hard to do the right thing. If the right thing was easy to do, everyone would be doing it. There's a lot of money and a lot of, if you just think of like if we want to go to the tech platforms, for example, it is very, very profitable to sow chaos online. Clicks, engagement, ads, it's good business. Is it the right thing to do? Absolutely not. So this idea of doing the right thing being hard is absolutely true. But also I want to give a little bit of grace to, I'll just use my own example. This interview of mine that didn't air on Palestine, that happened in 2017, and it took me 2 years to leave. Even though I wanted to leave, I was going to resign the following Monday morning because I was so enraged and upset, and I felt very betrayed by what had happened, by this profession that, supposedly values truth and transparency and accountability. But it took me 2 years to leave. And I think right now we're at a moment where maybe people who have not paid attention, who have not said anything, who felt like they didn't understand it enough, are finally maybe seeing it a little bit more clearly. And there is maybe perhaps some anger towards those people saying, oh, now it's convenient for you to speak up. Oh, now you're finding your voice. And I understand that anger. I do, and I felt it too. But I want to encourage everyone to help people who are just realizing what the right thing to do is, guide them towards that instead of shaming them for taking so long. Because I think we've all been part of this ecosystem that has ignored and downplayed and even outright misbelieved Palestinian voices. And now we're all coming to this consensus that it's wrong. So I think it's hard to do the right thing, especially when you don't know which way is up and which way is down, and when there's so much to lose: jobs, careers, fellowships, internships, titles, money. People have to keep their families afloat and themselves afloat. So all of this is to say doing the right thing is hard. Not everyone has been doing it, but more and more people are finding what the right thing is to do. And instead of anger, I think we should welcome them.
Exactly, because shaming those who are, whether that's late or not, willing to learn about the current situation would only drive them away from the facts and learning about the truth.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. You've said that by speaking up, you hope to change how the media treats Palestinian stories. What gives you hope or momentum when institutions resist?
What gives me hope and momentum, and in fact, it's actually the subject of my next article for The Walrus, is the student press. I feel like student journalists have been fearless on reporting on Palestine, whether it's reporting on the encampments, whether it's reporting on their university administrations, whether it is reporting on the protests. They have been so fearless and bold. They have, named the term, the genocide in Palestine. And I feel like the student press has so far, they are kind of unspoiled by market forces, by trying to get a job at a news organization. All they have is you have moral clarity and you have courage and you have your voice. And sometimes do an interview about Palestine where I've been really nervous and I'll get a really, really lovely note from a student journalist. And it's a big part of the reason why I wanted to be here with you all today, is because I feel like you and young people and the younger generation really does not care about looking perfect or doing the right things, or, you're really kind of committed to the truth. And history shows us, I mean, it was students across the US were against the Vietnam War when that was happening. They led protest movements. The student press was against it while mainstream media in the US was cheering the US Vietnam War. So I feel like history has shown us precedent that the students are almost always right. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Absolutely, because when I saw that the students of Columbia University were fearlessly setting up encampments in the face of police brutality, that definitely gave me a lot of hope. Because the only content I was seeing revolving around this issue at that time was the suppression of Palestinian voices and those who spoke up for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really brave. And right here, even at U of T and so many Canadian universities too, I visited the encampments at U of T and I spoke to some of the students who, launched them with sit-ins at the, university administration's office. And I was just in awe of not just their protests, but how deeply knowledgeable they were about policies and about history. And it is like, it's incredible. They are absolutely leading the way. And I'm just so happy to be able to support and learn from them.
Absolutely. They were just such a beacon of hope, especially last year when, police brutality against all these encampments were at its height and governments were actively trying to suppress this movement. They were such a beacon of hope, not just for Canada and US itself, also for people all over the world, because we aren't really used to seeing this sort of representation for minorities like Palestinians.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any journalism platforms, maybe on social media or independent outlets, that you've seen do a better job at countering the Palestinian media blackout?
Oh, absolutely. Here in Canada, I'll name a few. Samira Moyedin, who created On the Line Media. She was my former colleague at CBC. We worked together for years, and she left the CBC in 2023 or 2024 and has been doing incredible independent journalism on Canada and Palestine. And she's an independent journalist, and that's how she makes her living. So I really amplify her and support her. There's also a paper called The Maple, again, an independent journalism organization that's doing incredible investigative reporting on Canada's record on Israel and Palestine. And right now, they even have this amazing project where they're literally finding Canadians who have served in the IDF. So it's like real investigative work. They're looking at Canada's arms policy and record on providing weapons to Israel. Who else? There's The Grind. The Grind is also another independent media, independent newspaper that is doing incredible, mostly Toronto community reporting. So those are at least three that I can think of that I personally follow and support and amplify whenever I can.
I think, as you mentioned, independent news organizations have done such an amazing job at reporting the situation. Also, the creative work they've done, like you mentioned, the Maple doing a project on Canadians who worked in the IDF. I don't think any major news organization would ever have thought of that. And them doing this is just such an incredible thing because getting their lived experiences of people, of Canadians who worked in the IDF, would really be important to understand what their perspective was on this whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've actually been investigated by the RCMP for this investigation. So they are doing this at great personal risk. So, and like you said, I don't think any other news organization would be doing that story.
So, our last question to you for the day: what advice do you give for youth trying to counter this misinformation surrounding the coverage of Palestine and other controversial issues, especially when the conversation is so emotionally charged?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think the best piece of advice that I have is to go to the source. Go to the people who are most affected, not the ones who are watching it unfold from a neighboring country, not the ones who are sitting in their living rooms writing op-eds or posts on the internet. Go to the people. There's this quote that I'm absolutely going to butcher, something along the lines of, if you want to get to the truth, go to the people who are bleeding, right? So these are the people that will tell you the reality of what's happening. Skip the middleman and go straight to the source. And right now, we've never had more direct access to people on the ground, whether it's Indigenous people living in their communities here in Canada, or Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, or Black people living in the US and Canada who are talking about the experiences that they've had. We've never been more spoiled for options to get to the heart of the matter through the people who are experiencing it most intimately. So go to the source. I think that's like my most important piece of advice, is to go to the source and not somebody who is filtering that information for other audiences.
Exactly. And I feel like getting your information straight from the source, and in this case, the people living on ground and facing the tragic reality of the genocide occurring in the Gaza Strip, would really encourage people to overcome the desensitization that has occurred in most of us.
Absolutely. It totally breaks the desensitization. Absolutely.
Okay, that was our last question. Thank you so much for joining us. I think your insights have really, opened our minds and given us a whole new perspective in this issue. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your work, and keep it up.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Um,
much.
and to all our listeners, please follow her work at her website. We'll be linking that in our podcast description, so please do check it out.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye. It
We'll
was so
see
nice
you
talking to
soon.
you.
It was amazing talking to you.
Thank you. You too.
Let's look at how misinformation actually spreads. Misinformation is false information that's spread without malicious or harmful intent, while disinformation is the intentional version of this. So basically, it's misinformation spread maliciously to convince, confuse, or engage.
And Rishika, misinformation, it actually spreads faster than truth. People don't really verify their facts and they're constantly exposed to fake news. Now, this fake news, it is very attention grabbing, hence leading it to spread faster than truth. Sometimes there are so many deep fakes around here, it influences government response. It deepens mistrust on both sides of the conflict. Instead of people
Yeah.
actually studying the situation, people just create hard opinions.
Let's now delve into some concrete facts so we can, really build the conversation based off of that.
Hmm.
The region is in conflict because of a lot of different aspects. So, ongoing disputes include land, identity of the people, with the Israeli settlers arguing that they are the original people of the land, specifically Jerusalem. They state that they're historically and genetically Semites. Disputes also go on about their rights and political sovereignty.
Palestinians seek an independent state in West Bank and Gaza. and their capital as East Jerusalem. This creates some conflict because East Jerusalem is claimed both by Israel and by the people of Palestine. And this is a major part of the conflict.
Yeah, because the people of Israel consider Jerusalem to be the homeland of the Jewish people. And this is where a lot of conflict really originated. So, the Israeli perspective on this is also very, very different.
And media, there is not just media, there is so much misinformation online which is rampant everywhere, changing the meanings of clips, resurfacing and reshared misleading captions. There are common ways to make misleading content. There are AI generated images. AI generated and deep fakes, they are so common right now. There are also some false side survivor stories that are going around, and some people were exploiting this situation. There were these YouTube ads running that were raising funds, but actually a lot of them were exposed that they were actually not doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely noticed that. A lot of these people just turned out to be civilians.
Now, misinformation is not just rampant, it is also ever growing. Ever growing misinformation leads to different kinds of problems in the society. First of all, a kind of problem that it usually leads to is that the most emotional or the most attention grabbing content wins. A lot of times, factual content with actual factual accuracies, it is not highlighted. But the content which is the most emotional turns out to be the most attention grabbing and it wins. And a lot of times people just form their opinions based on racial biases. There's this thing in India that a lot of people were
Mhm.
simply against Palestine because Palestine is a Muslim majority country. And this,
Exactly.
yeah, even without knowing the facts, what happened, I was listening to the speech, with this very old speech. It is by Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, one of India's former prime
Oh,
ministers.
yes, yes. I've seen the speech. Yeah.
He was talking about Israel Palestine conflict, and modern day, he was from the old right wing, and modern day right wing is pretty confused on this topic, where the older right wing actually supported it. Even the left wing, if you look at left wing, the older left wing in India was very anti Palestine, but the modern left wing in India shows constant support, which is very confusing in itself. It almost feels like not just the people, but even the Indian politicians are sometimes, and not just Indian politicians, politicians of a lot of country themselves are sometimes not clear to form an opinion because they don't know the facts.
Exactly, and religious bias contributes to the information being spread because a lot of people just take advantage of this conflict to spread more hate on a religious group they hate, and in this case, it's the Muslims.
Yeah, and Islamophobia is very bad in India. And there's not just Islamophobia in India. Even though Hindus being in majority, there is Hindu phobia in India, Islamophobia in India, there is Christian phobia in India.
Yeah.
This creates such a complex mode here. I know about India because I am from India more.
And social media platforms like X, Instagram, and while TikTok is banned in India, all over the world, TikTok is this major platform that really helps drive this misinformation forward and spread it to millions and millions of people using the app. And the algorithms are designed in this way that it rewards the most dramatic content, whether that's true or not. And no one takes time out to verify this information, and that just helps spread this rampant misinformation all over.
There was this clip shown everywhere saying that, hey, this is what is happening. But actually, it turned out that clip was not even from the Israel Palestine conflict. It was from Syria. Do you remember about the clip?
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely seen the clip going around, and a lot of hateful comments and information spread from that one clip, and that really goes to show how much misinformation and this small act of changing the title of a clip can change how the public views and responds to this content,
I
right?
absolutely. Even
Hmm.
a little bit, even the caption of the clip can manipulate a whole lot of the meaning of that.
Exactly, and no one bothers to verify where the clip is sourced from. A lot of times it's just old clips or AI clips, now especially.
People have this very emotional mentality. People don't live on objectivity, people live on emotions, and that is where the problem occurs. People don't go to verify, people don't go to understand. They, it's almost like they want to prove that, okay, hey, if there is this wrong going on, I want to prove that I'm a good person, and that is why I will comment this and this and this. But in that urge of trying to prove themselves to be a good person, they don't even know what the thing is. It's almost like they have an urge to say, "Hey, I'm very good, so I should do this," but they don't even verify for what they are doing that.
And it's almost this, follow the herd mentality. A lot of times people's opinions are just shaped based of what their favorite creator says on social media. They don't ever bother fact checking the information shared with them by that influencer or creator, and that contributes to a lot of the misinformation spread online.
It's almost like people don't have opinions. All of their opinions, they're formed from the person they like and what that person is saying.
I completely agree. It's like there's this massive loss of our ability to critically analyze a situation based off of actual facts and statistics, right?
I agree. And I think a lot of the credit goes to education systems around the world who do not teach critical thinking. They do not teach rational understanding and analysis. But what they do is they simply tell children to memorize or understand things by memorization. They don't actually ever teach critical thinking or analysis of facts. You're not allowed to have different opinions while sitting in the same class. And that creates a big problem. You have to have the same opinion as teacher, and these same people goes on to have the same opinion as their politicians say.
I completely agree. It encourages this herd mentality that I was talking about because people forget that they can absolutely have their own thoughts and opinions, and they have this access, they have a lot of access to information online, but no one bothers to look it up because everyone just trusts the one person they like or follow on Instagram and TikTok, and that ends up being the cause for a lot of them not bothering to go and verify the information shared.
And this is not intentional, but at the same time, it is so systematic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the way these algorithms work, pushing the most dramatic content over the most credible one.
That is where the problem is.
And people engage with that type of content as well. We've gotten so used to engaging with this specific type of content that, and we're so desensitized to these issues as we scroll and scroll, that no one really bothers to sit and really think about what we've just witnessed on our phones. Desensitization is a big, big part of why people lose interest in finding out more about a conflict that is ongoing. With that, we come to the end of our first ever episode. Thank you so much to everybody who's tuned in and was listening, and we hope to see you next time too. Bye!